All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I am recording the session today, so it will be posted out on our website within the next few days. We'll have it up there. I'll send out a communication when it is live on our website for you to be able to go and check out. I'm glad that you were able to join us this morning. We have quite a few topics to cover regarding the legislation that passed this year, House Bill 1164 and Senate Bill 472. They both directly impact state charter schools specifically, and so we're going to walk through the different areas that we want you to be aware of in the legislation. So before we get started, I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm Sarah McLeod. I'm with the Georgia Department of Audits. I'm a deputy director in the Financial Audits Division. And my primary job is to oversee the school district audits for the department. So I've been with the department about 22 years now, and my job all 22 years has encompassed school districts in some way. And with this new legislation, we have been given the state charter schools in our purview as part of our responsibility, and I'll explain that moving forward. So I'm looking forward to establishing relationships with the state charter schools and getting to know everyone within the state charter school community like I have on the school district side over the last many years. So I also have on the call Christina Turner, who's our Deputy State Auditor of the Financial Audits Division. She oversees all the financial audits that go out. So not only do we do school districts, we also look at colleges and tech schools and agencies and the state ACFR as well. So that's what she's responsible for, and she's here with me today as well. So we'll go ahead and jump in. Today's format is we have 6 topic areas we're going to cover, and then a dedicated block for any questions and answering that you might have. You can drop your questions in the chat. I'm sorry, in the Q&A feature of Teams. At the top of your screen, you should see a button that says Q&A with a question mark. If you click on that, you should be able to drop your questions in there, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. So feel free to drop those in as I'm talking, and we'll definitely address those at the end of the presentation. I already mentioned, but the session is being recorded, and we will link to that out on our website. It'll go up on our YouTube channel. And then, like I mentioned, just submit your questions anytime throughout the session. So first, I want to give you a little bit of a reference as to what the 2 bills really mean and talk about. So we have two bills, they're companion bills, 1164 and 472. And they both passed in the 2026 General Assembly session. And 1164 and 472 were both signed by the governor, so they both are now in effect. 1164 really expanded audit oversight. It is the bill that has more of the meat to it, a lot of different criteria and responsibilities for the Department of Audits and school districts and charter schools throughout. So I'm just going to walk through some of what that bill covers. It does have expanded audit oversights with more audits being directed or conducted directly by the Department of Audits. And so eventually we are going to be pulling in more and more audits of school districts and state charter schools, but that will only be as our resources are able to handle the additional audits. So we are bringing in some new auditors and training them on how to do audits, but that's going to take time. And so we focused this year by pulling in the high-risk systems, which were the traditional school districts. So that is the additional audits we brought back in this year. We did not bring in any state charter schools for FY26. Something that does pertain to state charter schools is the new annual certifications. On an annual basis, there are 2 annual certifications that you'll have to complete moving forward. One is to do with audit readiness, and one is your financial obligations, and those are both due on December 31st, and we will talk about those a little bit more later in the presentation. 1164 also outlines and charges the Department of Audits with creating a 4-tier monitoring system. It is a risk designation framework, and so that is something that we're currently building out and looking at. We'll be working in conjunction with Georgia Department of Education and GOES, which was GOSA before July 1st. And that will be rolling out As we are building it out, we'll send more communication, and that will also impact state charter schools. There's also the concept of a CPA engagement authorization and auditor independence requirements. And we'll talk about those brief in a few minutes. It also gave the Department of Audits an investigation authority for financial mismanagement or misconduct at state charter schools and school districts. This is something that we had the authority with state agencies previously, and now they've applied it to the school district area. And we have some slides on that as well. 1164 also talks about superintendent contract extensions being capped during high-risk designations. So that is something that is in 1164. And also superintendent contract is in Senate Bill 472. It has some contract default provisions regarding a financial mismanagement finding that permits termination for cause. So that's 1164. And then you have Senate Bill 472, which really talks a little bit more about some of the consequences that follow 1164. 472 discusses board member suspension, which can be triggered by a Tier 4 designation or an investigation finding. It has the superintendent contract default provisions that I discussed. It talks about QBE, advanced distribution caps, and you would have to obtain a state auditor override opinion. And there's a process for that. And then also within that 472, there's an independent school system petition for the threshold change. This deals with traditional school districts that have a city school system within a county school system as well. And it changed the threshold of number of voters to be able to put it on the ballot. So it's from 25 to 10%. So that's kind of an overview of the two bills. I do want to mention that out on our website, we do have an entire page that's dedicated to the implementation of this legislation. And so out there currently is several different resources, but one I wanted to highlight in particular, if you're not familiar with this legislation yet, is a plain language summary. It's a 5 to 6 page document that's out there that goes through each bill and really discusses the different points throughout the bill, breaks it down in pretty plain language, easy to understand. So if you haven't seen that yet, you might want to go out there and grab it and review so you're more familiar with the bills. All right, the first item we're going to talk about is the CPA authorization process. Within 1164, it does say that no CPA firm can be engaged for the required annual audit without prior written authorization from the Department of Audits. And so the purpose of this is to confirm the firm's independence and qualifications before that engagement begins and not after. So in the past, we've had school districts, and I know that state charter schools are all audited by CPA firms, but they would select the firms or perhaps hire the CPA firms before the department was notified. So moving forward, there is going to be a framework in place so that the authorization is occurring before the audits are beginning. So what's going to be required? You are going to need to submit the authorization before you engage. And I'm going to talk through how we do that in just a few minutes. You still will continue to choose the firm. The DOA is not going to maintain any kind of pre-approved list. You're still responsible for choosing the CPA firm that will audit you. And this authorization will be required every year. So it is required annually and does not carry forward to future fiscal years. So what's inside the form is really basic information. It's going to show things like entity identification, which would be the state charter school information, whoever your CPA firm information is, the proposed engagement details, your independence and conflict disclosures, some standards, compliance, and then signatures. And so actually on this screen, you'll see that it says the signature of the CFO, superintendent, and board chair. We've actually revamped the form, and we're only going to require the CFO or finance person to complete the form and sign off on the form. So that is a change for the CPA authorization form. So something that is in place for FY26, we do realize that the timing of when the legislation was implemented and the beginning of the FY26 audit cycle, especially for state charter schools that have to have their audits completed by November 1st, that left a very short runway between those two dates. And so for FY26, the state auditor has issued a waiver allowing the same CPA firm to both prepare financial statements and conduct the audit. And also the waiver is going to include that the CPA firm could be selected prior to signing the engagement letter, because we realize that as of now, most school districts and probably state charter schools have been in communication with your CPA firm for the FY26 audit, and probably or possibly have signed an engagement letter. So that is going to be an exception for FY26 as well. So both of those are kind of waivers for FY26 when dealing with the CPA authorization. Moving forward, we are going to be exploring resources and training to support financial statement preparation going forward. About 10 years ago, almost a decade ago now, we used to provide financial statement training for school districts, where we would go and meet with school districts with GDOE and walk through the process of how you prepare financial statements. We are looking to bring that back. And then in addition, we're hoping to provide new tools that will assist in facilitating that process of financial statement preparation. So currently where things stand, the authorization form itself has been completed. I actually just got the form finalized and created into a fillable PDF format. And so that is the format that the form will have. We talked about already that the FY26 waiver is in place. And so we are going to ask that all state charter schools fill out this form. It really is not necessarily a matter of it being authorized this year, but it is a formality so that we ensure we're meeting the law. So we are going to ask that all state charter schools fill out the CPA authorization form. This also allows us to get an understanding of which CPA firms are being used by state charter schools and just get some background information. We are going to use SureLink as the method of collecting the form and having y'all submit the form back to us. And we will ensure that you get directions on how to set that up. I actually have some slides coming up that talks about SureLink. The things that are being finalized is really the finalization of the form. That really is just getting it loaded into the SureLink platform at this point. We are considering the process moving forward for any denied requests. If there's some sort of appeal process that would be considered, this would really only be impacting future years and not FY26. And then the standard for future exceptional case exceptions. So the law does state that the ability to use the same CPA firm for financial statement prep in your audit can be waived on an exceptional case basis. There are very few exceptions. The law specifically spells out scarcity of resources and cost. So we are working through what that'll look like moving forward to ensure that that is being applied equitably when those waivers are coming across our desk. All right, a little bit about submitting your CPA authorization form through SureLink. You're going to submit your completed CPA engagement authorization request form directly through the SureLink portal. All of the finance staff at the state charter schools will receive an invitation to set up an account. But once you're in there, it's very easy to use and user-friendly. You might be familiar with SureLink. I know some of the CPA firms utilize this for their audit process. And so if you already have an account with SureLink because of who your CPA firm, your auditor is, you are able to have two accounts within SureLink. So you would have one with your current CPA firm, and then you'll have another one for submitting required documents and certifications to the Department of Audits. So if you are familiar with it or you aren't, I'm sorry, you're able to drag and drop your files in. There's no software to install. It's very user-friendly. there's communication built into the system. So you're able to use comment sections to communicate directly with us if you have any questions while you're in there filling out the form, and it will notify me that you've asked a question and I can answer you within the system. The deadline to submit your CPA authorization form is going to be August 31st. I am going to have the form available on August 1st in SureLink, so you'll be able to start working on those forms at the beginning of August, and that'll give everyone a month to complete the forms and get them submitted back. The school districts have the same deadline as well, so it'll be August 31st for all state charter schools and school districts across the state. A little bit about getting started with SureLink. Like I mentioned, you're going to receive an email notification from SureLink. It'll have a link to create your account. A two-factor authentication is required for all Department of Audits clients. Then you'll be able to access your request list, which in this case, your request list is going to just be the one CPA authorization form. You'll be able to access that once you're inside your account. You will complete the form and then upload and submit it back to us all within your SureLink account. So that's a little overview of the CPA authorization process. I know it is something that is different and new for all state charter schools to complete. It is also a new form and process for the school districts on the other side as well. So if you have any questions as we're working through this, feel free to reach out to me directly. I will have some contact information on a later slide on how you can get in touch with me as well. All right, switching gears just a little bit to the risk designation update. There is like I mentioned before in 1164, there is a obligation for the Department of Audits to create a risk designation framework, and it's going to be a 4-tiered framework. And we have until school year 2028-2029 to have that completely developed and implemented. So we are currently working through that, like I mentioned before, determining the best criteria to categorize school districts and state charter schools into those tiers. The law did say at July 1st that we should designate school districts and state charter schools with a risk designation. And so for school districts, they have been under what we refer to as Senate Bill 68 risk designation for the last several years. However, that legislation did not include state charter schools. So currently, the Department of Audits did not have any assigned risk designation to use to designate a risk under 1164 or 472. So while the school districts maintained the same risk that they had under Senate Bill 68, we are not trying to place a risk on state charter schools until we get this new framework built out. We have talked with the State Charter School Commission, and we do understand that state charter schools are already evaluated for some financial criteria and do have a risk determination process. And we have looked at that and we're reviewing that as part of our process when we're considering the criteria moving forward as well. So again, we are developing the approach to have a risk assessment for state charter schools as part of our ongoing implementation work. And as we continue to build that out, I will be holding more of these virtual sessions to communicate out what that's going to look like. I'll also share written communications as well. But like I said, we really are planning to review and incorporate monitoring measures that charter schools are already using. So we've looked at it initially. A lot of the factors that are being used are similar to what the legislation calls out for us to consider when we're building the criteria. So look for more information to come on that as far as state charter schools having a risk assigned. I did want to give you a little overview of what a risk designation would mean. The law is very specific about the different areas that are implemented after you're designated moderate or high risk. If you're designated moderate or high risk, there are several things that will be required of the state charter school. You'll have to submit a corrective action plan that is approved by your board. and that it will be due within 60 days. You'll have to submit that to DOA, Department of Education, and GOES. And so that is something that will have to be detailed, describing how you're going to alleviate the findings that are in your audit report. I'm sure y'all are familiar with now, if you've received a finding in your audit process, you are required to give a corrective action plan to your auditors to be included within your audit report. This would be a separate corrective action plan that might be more detailed than what is typically included in an audit report. A lot of times within an audit report, we see statements such as we will implement internal controls to improve this process over employee compensation, or something pretty generic or very high level. Something that we're looking for with this corrective action plan that's going to be submitted and board approved will be more detailed, the actual steps that are going to be taken to alleviate those findings, what internal controls, what processes are going to be put in place. So that's the first item, is the corrective action plan. Additionally, it calls for monthly board reporting. So you would have a monthly report of your anticipated expenditures as presented to your board members. And so this will be a forward-looking report. It would be sharing your anticipated expenditures for the next month. In addition, there's a public notice, so a newspaper publication of your financial operations for 2 consecutive weeks, and that again would have to be board approved and signed by the board members and the superintendent. The law does say that the Department of Audits will provide a template for this, and so that's something that we're working on creating and getting guidance out. And then additionally, the law says for any state charter school or school system that is designated moderate or high risk, the Department of Audits will conduct the audit. So as I mentioned previously, this is not something that the department was able to completely implement in the first year of this legislation. And so we decided to focus the area where the highest risk was. And so we pulled back in those school districts that had previously had a CPA audit and are high risk. So we do have some new audits for our FY26 cycle, and that is where we put our focus. And as I said, as we continue to move through the future fiscal years, we will continue to evaluate what our resource availability is and how we can bring in the school districts or state charter schools that make the most sense. So in addition, the high risk designation is when you start to look at superintendent contracts and board member suspension. Again, these risk designations do not, or these outcomes of risk designations do not necessarily apply currently, because we are not applying a risk at this moment to state charter schools, but it is something to keep in the back of your mind as we're moving forward. And that's what this next slide talks about as we're looking ahead to building out the 4-tier framework. So this is an overview of what 1164 says the 4-tier framework should look like. Tier 1 is going to be fiscally sound. That would just be your routine monitoring. That means the state charter school is functioning as it should. Tier 2 and Tier 3 are your fiscal watch and fiscal distress. I'm sorry. Tier 2 is your fiscal watch, and that's going to be your moderate risk. And Tier 3 and Tier 4 are going to be your high risk. So Tier 3 is fiscal distress, and Tier 4 is critical emergency. And so again, we are looking to have this fully implemented in place across the state by the 2028-2029 school year. And while state charter schools, you guys don't have a risk designation yet, I do want you to be aware of what is coming, and we will continue to keep you in the communication loop to ensure that you are ready and aware of what's going to be implemented and expected. So that's an overview of looking at the risk designation as it currently stands, as it impacts state charter schools. I did mention there are 2 new annual certifications that are going to impact state charter schools. These are going to be required on an annual basis moving forward. And the first year they will be required is going to be FY26. There are 2. One is an audit readiness certification. The law says that both of these certifications are due December 31st. I do understand that state charter schools will have their audits completed ahead of the 12/31 deadline, For FY26, we're going to keep the due date of the audit readiness certification December 31st, even for state charter schools. So that should be a very easy certification for you to just go in and sign off that you're audit ready, because if your audit's already completed, then you were obviously audit ready by December 31st. Now, moving forward in FY27 and beyond, we are having conversations about moving the date to a date that makes more sense to align with when you would need to be ready for your audit to sort of meet the intent of the law here. But for FY26, you will just certify by December 31st that you were audit ready. And what that means is that you have your financial statements ready for audit, a lot of the supporting documentation that your auditors are always asking for, your reconciliations, your subsidiary ledgers, all of that is ready and complete by that date. So we are building out an audit readiness certification checklist and communication documents. And once those are ready, I will be providing those out and having another virtual session to discuss. But just know that December 31st, you're going to have that audit readiness certification, even if your audit is already completed this year. In addition, there's a second financial obligation certification that's required, and this says that you are not delinquent on payments to your state health benefit plan, TRS, ERS, PSERS, or Department of Labor. And so you're going to certify for this on December 31st as well, that you're not delinquent on any payments. We do recognize that at times you may have amounts outstanding because you may be having some discrepancies that you're going back and forth with these various vendors. For those, we ask that you maintain any of the reconciliations that you completed or documentation that you have on hand where you have communicated with the various benefit vendors, and you'll be able to provide that as documentation during the certification process to show that you are making your payments timely, but this amount that's outstanding is in current dispute. The focus of this law is to target those entities that are just non-paying, not necessarily the entities that are following the proper steps to ensure that they're reconciling their payments into what should be paid. So again, the financial obligations certification will start in FY26 as well. So this year, not FY26, but calendar year 26. The law does require that there are 3 signatures on those 2 certifications. And so the chief administrator, your finance person, and your governing board chair will all need to sign off on that form by December 31st. Right now, we are looking at utilizing SureLink for that process. If that were to change, I will communicate that out. Again, there's going to be lots of communications this fall on how to get these certifications completed. But right now, we are hoping to be able to utilize SureLink again and just continue to use that software as our collection portal and keep everything simple. One of the good things, if we are able to move forward using SureLink, is that only the finance person would need to create an account within SureLink. The other 2 that have to sign would be able to be sent the signature link through email, so they would not have to create their own account within SureLink as well. So I think that'll streamline the process and make it a little easier to capture all of those signatures. We would just need one person to maintain an actual SureLink account with the Department of Audits. I do want you to remember and circle on your calendar and put a star that those certifications are due by December 31st, because the law specifically states that non-filers are automatically designated high risk. So at that time, any state charter school that had not submitted both of these certifications would move to a high risk status just because a certification was not filed. So we definitely don't want that to happen. I don't want any school districts or state charter schools to wind up on the high risk list just due to failure to submit a form. So I will be sending reminders out and have communications, but make sure that you have that date in your mind and on your calendar so that you can ensure those are met timely. Just another note, if you certify and it's later found out that it was materially inaccurate, that could also trigger a high risk or moderate risk designation. I don't really see that being an issue for the audit readiness with the state charter schools, since y'all do have earlier audits, but just make sure that whatever you're certifying is factual. And so that way we don't want anyone to wind up on a high risk or moderate risk list just for administrative type issues. So that is what we're looking at for those certifications. This slide I've kind of covered previously. I jumped ahead of myself, but as I mentioned, and y'all know, many of those, all of your audits are completed ahead of many school systems. Like I mentioned, we do plan to move the date up for the audit readiness certification moving forward, but just due to implementation, timing, and being sure we have everything appropriately designed and finalized, we're just going to keep the 12/31 across the state for all entities this year. And we will be sure to communicate a change in date for next year way ahead of when anything would be due. All right, so that's an overview of the certification requirements. Next, I have just a couple slides about our new investigatory authority. So the law does say that the state auditor can go in and investigate any local school system when facts, records, circumstances, or information indicate mismanagement or misconduct. This does mirror the department's existing authority over state government agencies. It's something that we've had in that arena for many years, and this just adds that we can do the same type of investigation work within the school district side. So what would one of these investigations look like? It is not going to be like a routine audit that's conducted annually where we're reviewing financial statements and records and internal controls and putting an opinion on financial statements. It's going to be an investigation that's going to be triggered by those facts or records or information indicating there's some kind of mismanagement or misconduct, and not by audit findings alone. So it would be a very different engagement. The scope would be different. We would only be looking at the items that were brought to our attention that we would need to do any sort of discovery work about those facts or information that were relayed to us regarding that entity. So definitely not a financial audit. It is different. It normally is not as in depth because, again, we're not having to put an opinion on anything when we're doing the investigation. We are building some dedicated capacity to this unit. We have added a team member that has a deep forensic accounting background, and she is helping lead this unit and building out all of the procedures and templates and processes that we're going to follow. And that is underway now. They are sitting with me for review. And so that's kind of where we stand on this. As we build out more finalized information that should be shared out, we will be sure to share that as well in this area. But that is to come. It was another area within the law that said this was a responsibility of the Department of Audits. All right, where to go for help throughout this process of implementing legislation? There are lots of questions that have come up. There are, as you can see just from this short presentation, there are multiple areas that have to be implemented and considered. So we want to make sure that everybody knows where they can access support. I mentioned earlier that our website does have an entire web page dedicated to the implementation. I will continue to load resources there as they become available, so be sure you're checking that often. We have created a dedicated inbox, which is the school oversight at audits.ga.gov. That is the inbox that I do believe I sent out the link for you to join the meeting today, so you might be familiar with that as well. You can also contact me at any time with any questions. And then we are working on our FAQ document. We had these virtual sessions with the school districts, and now we're having yours today. And we're going to compile all the questions that were in those sessions and a bunch of questions that I've received via email. And we're going to publish that FAQ document out on our website. So that is to come. I'm reviewing those questions now. So hopefully within the next week or so, that can be loaded and put out on our webpage. So you can access that if you have any questions. It may have already been covered. A little bit about what the FAQ is going to cover. I already have different sections built out for general information, the CPA authorization process, the risk designation, your certifications, and the investigation authority. So it kind of mirrors the sections of the presentation today. So you can look to see that, and we'll continue to add sections as needed. I'm sure we'll have one for audit readiness coming, and then we'll continue to build out the risk designation with like the tier framework. So we will get that posted out on our website. And then some key dates ahead. You have the July 1st was when the HB 1164 became effective. Don't forget, we have the August 31st CPA authorization form due date. The November 1st is when I will have the certification forms that are due December 31st distributed and ready for your review and to be completed. And I will send out a final reminder about the certifications on December 14th, hoping to catch everybody before their winter break. And then the actual certifications will be due, like I mentioned previously, on December 31st. So as other key dates pop up within this timeline, I will communicate those out. But those are the big ones to be aware of and have on your calendar moving forward. So that's the presentation part of today. I'm going to hop over to our Q&As and see if we have any questions, and we have a few. So let me address those, and if I can't address them today, I will get back to you and make sure we get an answer and include it in the FAQ document. So the first question says, for state charter schools, which form do we need to complete the waiver? Yes, so state charter schools will be completing the CPA authorization form. And like I mentioned, we recognize that state charter schools are all utilizing a CPA firm for their audit. And we understand that most of you probably have already established that relationship or agreement for your FY26 audit, and that's fine for this year. We just ask that you please complete this form as part of meeting the letter of the law of implementing the legislation. So it's really a formality this year, but we would like to start collecting information about the state charter schools, which CPA firm they're using. The form does ask for some background information, so we feel that would be helpful just because we don't have as much history with the state charter schools as we do with the school districts. So again, you will have to complete the waiver and the 2 certifications that are due December 31st. The next question says, where can we get the slides? We also need to know where we can get the authorization form for a state charter school. So the slides will be put out on our website along with the presentation, the recorded presentation today. And then remember that the authorization form is going to be in SureLink. You will be getting the finance individual at your state charter school will be getting an email to set up an account with SureLink, and the form will be in your account in SureLink for you to download, complete, and re-upload within the system. All right, the next one says, let's see, let me expand it. Does the superintendent cap and board member suspension penalties apply to state charters or only local districts? And can you provide additional information regarding the foreign funding transparency certification due July 2027? So the superintendent cap and board member suspension penalties in 472, it does only outline local school districts. I would need to actually pull my legislation back up, but I believe 1164, when it talks about the superintendent contract cap within the risk designation framework, does apply to state charter schools as well. But I will make sure I get you a good answer on that and include it in the FAQ that'll be on our website. And then your second question, can you provide any additional information regarding the foreign funding transparency certification? We as a department are working on getting guidance out about that. I know that we've had some internal meetings on that, and I will be providing more information in upcoming presentations. I will be at GASBO in November, but we can make sure that we get some information out about that moving forward. The next question is, do the CPAs need to submit anything to qualify? No, they themselves do not. There is an area on the authorization form that'll ask for like your CPA firm's name, your partner contact, their name. And so there is some information about your CPA firm, but they do not have to complete anything to qualify. And like I said, the Department of Audits is not going to get into the process of providing a list of approved CPA firms. I know that y'all currently have a list that you work off of, but we will not be like providing or telling you who to use. We're not doing that for the school districts either. The next question says, do state charter schools need to hire a service provider for the audit readiness certification, or can it be prepared by the finance team internally? You can definitely handle the audit readiness certification internally. When I have the finalized audit certification checklist, you will be able to kind of read over it and see what that looks like, and see if that's something that you would be able to handle with your finance team internally, or if you would need to seek, external help on that. So, like I said, for FY26, all school districts and state charter schools are able to use the same CPA firm to prepare their financial statements and do their audit. So we have a little while to do the research and see the direction that you're going to want to go with that. Next question is, can you please confirm whether beginning FY27 we'll be required to engage an audit firm other than our annual auditor to perform the financial obligation certification and audit readiness? So I'll answer this. It's kind of two pieces here. The financial obligation certification is definitely something that the state charter school yourself will prepare. You would know if you are current or not in making those payments to the benefit vendors. So that is something that will remain on the state charter school themselves to complete. Moving forward in FY27, the way the law does read, it states that a CPA firm or organization cannot both do audit readiness services and complete the audit. And so audit readiness, as I talked about, does include having a set of financial statements ready for audit. And so that takes out that financial statement preparation process. And that also applies to our school districts, and it impacts the Department of Audits because the Department of Audits has been preparing financial statements for school districts for several years now. We do over 50 financial statements on an annual basis. So the law does preclude us from doing that. And moving forward, it does the same thing for the state charter schools. I know we've had one good conversation with the State Charter School Commission. I know that y'all work a little differently than school districts, and we'll continue to speak with them in the upcoming months to see what that process is going to look like. But as far as the law says, it does say that audit readiness services need to be separate from who performs your audit. Now, the actual audit readiness certification, the end of that question, that will be completed by the school district. So you would certify that you were ready for audit. The services to get you ready for audit is the piece that the law speaks to, but the two certifications will be completed by the state charter schools. The next question says, I'm wondering what defines preparation of financial statements. For example, historically, state charter school auditors have sometimes done final coding before finalizing the audit. Is this now prohibited? So maybe if I don't answer your question here, you can contact me offline to get into more details about your specific situation. And just because I'm not, again, transparency, completely familiar with how things have worked for state charter schools historically, but if you have auditors, external auditors from a CPA firm helping you prepare your financial statements, then that would be what is prohibited under the law. So that's how they're defining it. If you want to discuss more about what defines preparation of financial statements, I'm happy to chat with you offline and we can discuss that further though. All right, a few new questions, I think. This says, our chief executive received the email regarding this training. Who do we contact to ensure the finance team is included moving forward? So I was given a contact listing from the State Charter School Commission, and that is what I utilize to send out the invitations. If you want me to have your email address, you can utilize the school oversight email address that was on these slides, or the email It should be the same email that you got the link to join this meeting. Just shoot me an email with your address and I'll make sure that you're the contact for your school for the Sure link. And that goes for anybody that's on the call. If you received the link via a forwarded email from someone else and you want to be the contact person, just shoot me an email. I can update my contact listing. Are schools able to add other users to SureLink, or who should we contact to add additional accounts? So yes, once you have your main person identified, it's going to be called the system administrator within SureLink, I believe is the terminology. Don't completely quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. For your entity, then you'll be able to add other people to the account and assign them to be able to complete items as well. And then the last question right now says, can the auditor type the financials and footnotes? Again, we can talk about this offline, but if they're literally just typing the financials and footnotes, that's probably a conversation that we need to have just so I have better understanding and clarification about what's actually occurring there. Again, the law is just very clear about audit readiness versus doing the audit, and it needs to be two separate entities moving forward. And so I would really be cautious, and you'll have to complete a form and you're going to attest to if that CPA firm is doing your audit readiness services. So just keep that in mind moving forward. You want to make sure there's a real clear distinction between those two functions moving forward. But feel free to reach out to me. I don't mind having a conversation with you and seeing if we can address your concern. And I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. If you have one, go ahead and drop it in there and I will address it before we're done. But otherwise, I do appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I know everybody's busy getting ready for school to be back in session. So for you to take an hour out of your day, we do appreciate that. I hope that you found this information useful. Just a reminder, the recording and slides will be posted to our website within a week, hopefully even sooner than that. I have the slides ready. It's just a matter of getting the recording set up to share with y'all. So look forward to that. And again, if you have any questions that you didn't ask today or you think of something later, don't hesitate to reach out and I will try to answer any questions that y'all might have. All right, I don't see any other questions, so we are done. I appreciate y'all. Thank you.